A question I avoided. Have you ever noticed this strange feeling, when you're not bad enough to give up, but also not strong enough to continue? This video is for that moment. 2 weeks ago, here in the United States, I almost stopped believing in 3 things at once: love, marriage, and my ability to keep learning English. Not because something dramatic exploded, but because everything went quietly wrong. If you're tired of trying, tired of listening, tired of explaining yourself, in English or in love, maybe my story will sound uncomfortably familiar. That I avoided one question for a long time. A simple question. So simple it felt dangerous. Am I still allowed to lean on someone, or should I handle everything alone now? In English, the question sounds even lighter. Do you still need help? But emotionally, it weighed like a suitcase packed by someone else. 2 weeks ago, my life in the US looked normal from the outside. Same apartment. Same grocery store. Same polite, "How are you?" from strangers who didn't wait for an answer. My marriage looked fine too. No shouting, no doors slammed, no dramatic goodbye scenes. Just silence. And silence, as you know, is fluent in every language. That week, my English practice started to feel heavier than usual. Listening felt like noise. Reading felt slow. Speaking? I avoided it whenever I could. Psychologists actually have a term for this: cognitive overload. When emotional stress increases, your brain protects itself by shutting down non-essential tasks. Guess what your brain thinks is non-essential when you're emotionally tired? Yes. English practice. And honest conversations. At night, I would lie next to the person I love and rehearse English sentences in my head instead of talking. Simple ones. I feel tired. I need support. I don't know what's wrong. Funny thing is, those sentences are easy for beginners. A 1 level. But saying them to someone you love? That's advanced. Very advanced. There's research showing that emotional safety directly affects language learning. When you feel judged or disconnected, your brain's amygdala, the alarm system, activates. When that happens, learning drops. Listening drops. Speaking freezes. It's not laziness. It's biology. Basically, your nervous system is throwing a quiet tantrum. One evening, after another long, quiet dinner, I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't just avoiding English practice. I was avoiding vulnerability. In marriage. In friendship. In life. I was trying to be strong, which often means silent. In American culture, independence is praised. But no one tells you the hidden cost. Loneliness with good pronunciation. That's when the question I avoided came back. Not loudly. Softly. Like slow English audio played at 0.75 speed. Do you have the courage to lean on others? Courage, not weakness. Courage to say things imperfectly. To speak with an accent. To admit you're not okay. In English, and in love, this channel exists for slow practice. Slow listening. Slow speaking. but also slow honesty. Because improvement doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from feeling safe enough to continue. That week taught me something simple but uncomfortable. If your heart is exhausted, your English will be too, and this is only the beginning. Because what happened next, in the following days, changed the way I see marriage, friendship, and learning languages forever. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago sounds close, but emotionally, it feels like a different season. Back then, nothing was officially wrong. No big mistakes. No betrayal. No dramatic message left unread. Just a quiet heaviness that followed me everywhere, like background noise you don't notice until it stops. That's the dangerous part. When pain whispers instead of screams, you start doubting whether it's real at all. Life in the US moves fast, even when your heart doesn't. In the morning, I stood in line for coffee, listening to casual English float around me. Simple phrases. No problem. Have a good one. Take care. I understood every word. But understanding doesn't mean feeling connected. You can be fluent and still feel completely lost at home. My marriage was entering that strange phase people rarely talk about. Not honeymoon. Not crisis. Something in between. We functioned well. We paid bills. We shared meals. We asked practical questions like, "Did you lock the door?" But we stopped asking emotional ones. And according to relationship psychology, that's usually the first crack. When couples stop checking in, emotional distance grows quietly, efficiently, like mold behind a clean wall. That week, my English routine collapsed in the same way. I didn't stop completely. I just shortened it. 5 minutes instead of 30. One video instead of 3. I told myself I was busy. That's a lie our brains love. Neuroscience shows that when motivation drops, the brain looks for logical excuses to protect self-esteem. I'm busy sounds much kinder than I'm tired of trying. One night, while doing the dishes, I noticed how we stood farther apart than usual. Not far. Just enough. That distance felt identical to how English felt lately. Not impossible, just farther than before. I wanted to say something meaningful, but my head offered only simple sentences. I feel strange. Something is off. In English, they sound basic. In marriage, they feel terrifying. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Emotional tension reduces working memory. Studies show stress can lower language processing capacity by up to 30%. That means when love feels unstable, your brain literally has fewer resources to form sentences, recall vocabulary, or stay focused. So if you're blaming yourself for being bad at English lately, maybe it's not about English at all. That realization came slowly. Over several quiet mornings. Over polite conversations that stayed safely shallow. Over the feeling of being surrounded by people but unsupported. And the irony? I was in a marriage. I wasn't alone. But loneliness doesn't care about facts. It cares about connection. 2 weeks ago, I still believed pushing harder was the answer. Practice more. Be stronger. Don't complain. Don't rely on anyone. That mindset is praised everywhere, from productivity culture to language learning videos. But psychology tells a different story. Sustainable progress comes from safety, not pressure. From support, not isolation. I remember thinking, standing by the window, watching American flags move gently in the wind, maybe this is adulthood. Quiet struggle. No instructions. And for a moment, I accepted that idea. That maybe love fades quietly. Motivation too. That maybe you're supposed to carry everything alone once you're grown, but that thought, like bad grammar, didn't sit right. Something inside me resisted. Weakly. Softly. And that resistance, small as it was, set the stage for what happened next, because loving someone in a foreign land, with a foreign language shaping your thoughts, changes everything. Love in a foreign land. There's a strange kind of pressure that comes with loving someone in a country that doesn't feel like home yet. Everything around you speaks a language that isn't yours, and slowly, quietly, that language starts shaping how you think, how you argue, how you stay silent. In the United States, love often looks confident from the outside. Direct. Clear. But inside a marriage lived by a non-native heart, things move slower. Softer. More fragile. 2 weeks ago, I realized I was translating more than words. I was translating emotions. When my partner said something simple, my brain didn't just hear English. It searched for meaning, tone, intention. Linguists call this emotional decoding. It uses a lot of mental energy. That's why, at the end of the day, you feel exhausted even if nothing big happened. Your brain has been working overtime just to feel safe. In a foreign land, misunderstandings grow easily. Not because of bad intentions, but because nuance is expensive. In your first language, you can argue and repair in seconds. In English, especially when you're tired, emotions lag behind words. You respond late. You choose the wrong sentence. Or worse, you choose silence. And silence, in marriage, feels like rejection even when it's actually confusion. That week, I noticed how often I said, "It's fine." In English, "it's fine" sounds harmless. Friendly. In relationships, it often means the opposite. Psychologists call it emotional masking, using neutral language to hide discomfort. The problem is, your body doesn't believe the mask. Stress hormones still rise. Connection still drops. I started missing my old self. The version of me who could explain feelings clearly. Who didn't need extra time to respond. Who wasn't afraid of saying the wrong thing in the wrong language. Loving in the US made me more careful, but also more distant. And that distance slowly leaked into everything, including my motivation to practice English. Here's the paradox no one warns you about. The more you need English to survive emotionally, the harder it becomes to use. Neuroscience explains this through the affective filter. When anxiety rises, your brain blocks new input. Listening becomes tiring. Speaking feels risky. So if you're living abroad and your English suddenly feels worse, it's not regression. It's protection. Point. One evening, we sat on the couch, both scrolling on our phones, physically close but emotionally miles apart. I wanted to say something real. Something honest. But my inner voice whispered, "Not now. You'll say it wrong." That voice sounds practical. It's not. It's fear wearing logic's clothes. Marriage in a foreign land doesn't fail loudly. It fades quietly unless someone interrupts the pattern. That week, I didn't know how to interrupt it yet. I only knew something was slipping. Love. Confidence. My sense of belonging. All tied together by a language that felt heavier every day, and the hardest part? I blamed myself. For not being fluent enough. Calm enough. Strong enough. But blame is just pain looking for a target. What I really needed was understanding, of my brain, my heart, and the invisible pressure of living and loving in a second language. The real crack, though, didn't come from distance. It came from one small moment where English, emotion, and exhaustion collided. When English felt heavy. There's a moment when a language stops feeling like a tool and starts feeling like a weight. For me, that moment came in the most ordinary way. Standing in the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee gone cold, trying to answer a simple question from the person I love. Nothing dramatic. Just a normal sentence. And yet, my mind went blank that I knew the words. That was the frustrating part. They were there, floating somewhere behind my eyes. But my mouth refused to cooperate. Psychologists call this speech inhibition under emotional stress. When your emotional load is high, your brain prioritizes survival over expression. It's not that you forget English. It's that your brain temporarily locks the door. That week, English stopped being neutral. Every sentence felt like effort. Listening felt like lifting weights with tired arms. Even friendly conversations outside, at the store, at work, left me drained. And when you're drained, you don't bring your best self into your marriage. You bring leftovers. That I started associating English with pressure. Pressure to explain. Pressure to clarify. Pressure to not misunderstand. According to behavioral science, when the brain links a task with negative emotion, motivation drops automatically. No discipline problem. No laziness. Just classical conditioning. English became the sound of stress at home. This showed up in strange ways. I answered shorter. I nodded more. I avoided deep topics. My partner noticed, of course. Humans are extremely sensitive to emotional withdrawal. Research shows that even microdelays in response time can be interpreted as disinterest or rejection. I wasn't pulling away on purpose. I was conserving energy. One night, I tried to practice speaking alone. Just me and a mirror. Simple sentences. I feel overwhelmed. I need patience. I am trying. They sounded slow. Broken. Childlike. And suddenly, something painful hit me. These were exactly the sentences I needed in my marriage, but I was rehearsing them in private, like a secret. Here's something interesting. Studies on language learners show that speaking aloud in a low-pressure environment increases fluency faster than silent practice. But emotionally, I was doing the opposite. I was practicing alone to avoid being seen struggling. In both English and love. Same pattern. Different surface. English felt heavy because it carried more than grammar. It carried fear of being misunderstood. Fear of causing conflict. Fear of not being enough. And when a language carries fear, every word becomes expensive. I remember thinking, native speakers don't have to be brave just to speak. But that's not entirely true. Everyone is brave in different areas. For me, courage wasn't about pronunciation. It was about honesty. Saying, slowly and imperfectly, that I was tired. That I was scared. That I needed help, but that week, I didn't say it yet. I kept swallowing words like unfinished sentences. And swallowed words don't disappear. They sit in your body. They turn into tension. Into silence. Into distance. The heaviness didn't break us. Not yet. What broke the balance was something much smaller. A moment so small it almost didn't matter. Almost. Silent evenings. Silence doesn't arrive suddenly. It seeps in, like fog through an open window you forgot to close. One evening at a time. One unfinished sentence at a time. That week, our evenings became quiet in a way that felt organized. Peaceful on the surface. Empty underneath. We would finish dinner and sit across from each other, both pretending to be relaxed. Phones in hand. Screens glowing. That modern posture of avoidance. Relationship researchers call this parallel living, when couples share space but not attention. It's not conflict. It's something more dangerous. It's emotional absence. In those moments, my brain did something interesting. It replayed old conversations in my head, in English and in my native language. Better versions. Clearer responses. Smarter tone. Neuroscience says the brain prefers imagined control to real uncertainty. So instead of speaking imperfectly, I rehearsed silently. Over and over. That habit feels safe. It isn't. Silent evenings do something subtle to your motivation. When your emotional world shrinks, your willingness to try new things shrinks with it. That's why my English practice quietly disappeared from my routine. Not because I stopped caring. But because caring started to hurt. I noticed I was avoiding listening practice the same way I avoided difficult conversations. I told myself I'd do it later. Tomorrow. Weekend. Classic procrastination, right? Not exactly. Studies show procrastination is often an emotional regulation strategy. You delay tasks that trigger discomfort. English had become emotionally expensive. What scared me wasn't the silence itself. It was how quickly I adapted to it. Humans are incredibly flexible. We normalize discomfort faster than we should. After a few nights, quiet felt normal. And normal silence in a marriage is like normal pain in your body. It means something is wrong. One evening, I caught myself thinking, at least we're not fighting. That's a common trap. Therapists warn that the absence of conflict doesn't equal connection. Sometimes, it just means both people are tired. Too tired to reach out. Too tired to explain themselves in any language. In those silent evenings, English became optional. And that's dangerous for learning. Language thrives on interaction, not perfection. The less you speak, the more foreign it feels. The same rule applies to love. The less you share, the more distant it becomes. I tried to comfort myself with logic. We're adults. Life is busy. This is normal. But my body didn't believe that story. Tight shoulders. Shallow breathing. Difficulty focusing. Classic signs of emotional suppression. Your nervous system keeps the score, even when your words don't. There's something ironic here. Silence feels like rest, but it actually costs energy. Suppressing thoughts requires effort. That's why, at the end of those evenings, I felt exhausted without doing anything. Emotional labor with no visible result. I didn't know it yet, but we were approaching a tipping point. Not a dramatic explosion. Just a small crack, waiting for pressure. And pressure doesn't need much space to do damage. The next moment would be easy to dismiss. A tiny disagreement. The kind couples forget the next day. But this one landed differently. A small fight, big crack. It started over something so small it almost feels embarrassing to mention. A misheard sentence. A tone that landed wrong. A pause that lasted half a second too long. In another week, another mood, it would have disappeared instantly. But timing matters. Emotional fatigue turns pebbles into pressure points. I remember thinking, this isn't about what we're saying. And psychology agrees. Relationship research shows that most conflicts are not about content, but about unmet emotional needs underneath. The argument was brief. Controlled. Polite, even. But that politeness was sharp. Like a smile held too long, English played a quiet role in that moment. Not as the cause, but as the amplifier. When you're not fully comfortable in a language, you rely more on tone and timing. When those feel off, your brain fills the gaps with threat. That's not drama. That's survival wiring. I responded slower than usual. Not because I didn't care. Because my brain was translating while my heart was reacting. That delay was enough. Humans interpret delayed responses as withdrawal. It's an instinct. In marriage, instinct beats logic every time. After the exchange, we both went quiet. Not angry. Just off. That's when I felt the crack. Subtle, but real. The sense that something shifted. Not broken. Just less stable. Like standing on ice you didn't know was thin. That night, I couldn't focus on anything. Not English videos. Not reading. My thoughts looped. Cognitive scientists call this rumination, when the brain replays unresolved emotional moments to search for closure. It feels productive. It isn't. It drains mental energy and kills motivation that I blamed myself for not speaking faster, clearer, softer. I replayed alternative sentences in my head. Better English. Better timing. Better version of me. But perfection is a cruel teacher. It only teaches you what you weren't taught. Here's something useful. Research on conflict resolution shows that repair matters more than accuracy. You don't need perfect words. You need presence. Eye contact. A willingness to stay. Language learners often think they must get it right before speaking. Relationships collapse under the same rule. That small fight didn't escalate. It didn't need to. The damage came from what followed: distance, avoidance, careful behavior, walking around the topic like it might explode. And avoidance feeds anxiety. Anxiety feeds silence. Silence feeds disconnection. The next day, everything looked normal again. Morning routines. Casual talk. But underneath, something stayed unresolved. Like a sentence without punctuation. You can keep reading, but it never really ends. By that point, I wasn't just tired of English. I was tired of trying. And that's a dangerous place. Because when effort feels pointless, the brain starts looking for exits. That was the moment loneliness peaked. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet realization that you feel alone even when you're not. The loneliness peak. Loneliness doesn't always look like being alone. Sometimes it looks like lying next to someone you love, staring at the ceiling, feeling oddly separate. That was the peak. Not painful enough to scream. Just heavy enough to sink. That morning, I went outside for a walk. Cold air. Wide streets. The kind of American quiet that feels spacious, not comforting. I passed people talking on the phone, laughing easily, switching topics without effort. Their English flowed. Their lives looked connected. Comparison crept in without asking permission. Social psychologists say loneliness is less about the number of relationships you have and more about the quality of emotional access. You can be married and still feel emotionally locked out. And when you feel locked out, your motivation drops across the board. Language learning included that I noticed something uncomfortable. I had stopped expecting support. That's usually a sign you've been disappointed too often, or you're afraid of being a burden. Many adults confuse independence with emotional self-isolation. In the US, that confusion is almost cultural. That I thought about calling a friend. Then I didn't. I thought about saying something honest at home. Then I didn't. Avoidance felt safer than vulnerability. But safety without connection becomes loneliness very fast. From a neuroscience perspective, humans regulate emotions socially. We calm down faster when someone listens. Without that, stress stays in the body longer. That's why my sleep was light. My focus was scattered. English felt even harder. My brain was busy surviving that the peak of loneliness. The mind starts telling dangerous stories. You're on your own. Don't rely on anyone. Handle it. Those thoughts sound strong. They're actually fear-based. Strength isn't isolation. It's selective openness. That afternoon, I sat in the car and practiced one sentence out loud. Slowly. I'm not okay. My accent was obvious. My voice felt small. But something shifted. Saying it, even alone, lowered the pressure in my chest. Language researchers call this externalization. Putting feelings into words reduces emotional load. That was the first crack of light. Not from fixing anything. Just from naming the truth. Loneliness grows in vagueness. It shrinks when defined that I didn't know yet who I would lean on. I only knew I couldn't carry everything silently anymore. Marriage. English. Life abroad. None of it was designed for solo mode. The next step wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve a deep speech or a perfect apology. It involved another person. Unexpected. Simple. Human, and that's where the story changed direction. One honest conversation. It didn't start with a confession. No cinematic build-up. Just a casual question from someone I didn't plan to open up to. A friend. Not a best friend. Not a therapist. Just someone who noticed I looked slower than usual. They asked, "You okay?" 3 words. Simple English. No pressure. Normally, I would have answered automatically. I'm fine. Fluent. Efficient. End of story. But that day, something in me paused. A micropause. Linguists say hesitation often signals internal conflict. Psychologists say it's the moment truth tries to enter. That I said, slowly, not really. My grammar wasn't perfect. My tone was flat. But it was honest. That one sentence did more than a week of silence. Research shows that verbalizing emotional distress, even briefly, activates the brain's prefrontal cortex, reducing emotional overload. Translation: saying the truth out loud makes your brain less dramatic. We talked slowly, with gaps, with misunderstandings, with moments where I searched for words and just stopped. And nothing bad happened. No judgment. No fixing. Just listening. That's when I realized something painful and freeing at the same time. I had been more afraid of being seen imperfectly than of actually suffering. In English learning, there's a concept called comprehensible output. You improve when you try to express yourself, even if it's messy. The same rule applies to relationships. Clarity grows through imperfect attempts, not silent perfection. That conversation didn't solve my marriage. It didn't magically restore motivation. But it did one crucial thing. It reminded me that leaning on others doesn't weaken you. It stabilizes you. Emotional regulation is a shared process. Humans are wired that way. I walked away feeling lighter. Not happy. lighter. There's a difference. Happiness is a result. Lightness is a condition that makes results possible. That night, I went home and noticed something subtle. I wasn't rehearsing sentences in my head as much. My body felt less guarded. That's because emotional validation lowers cortisol levels. Less cortisol means better memory, better focus, better language processing. Point 1. Honest conversation reopened a door I had quietly closed. Not just to people, but to effort. To trying again. To speaking, even when it feels slow. That I didn't rush to fix anything. I didn't need to. The next lesson was about something more difficult than speaking. That it was about listening. Learning to listen again. Listening sounds passive, but it's not. Real listening costs energy. Especially when you're tired, emotional, and operating in a second language. That week, I realized I hadn't stopped speaking, I had stopped listening. Not just to my partner, but to myself. At home, conversations resumed, but carefully. Slower. Less automatic. I noticed how often I prepared my response while the other person was still talking. That habit is common in language learners. Your brain panics about form before it understands meaning. In relationships, that panic feels like distance. Active listening has a simple structure: attention, silence, reflection. Research shows that when people feel truly heard, their defensiveness drops within minutes. No solutions required. Just presence. I tried it. Not perfectly, but intentionally. Point 1. Evening, instead of fixing or explaining, I asked one question. Can you tell me more? Simple English. Powerful effect. That I listened without interrupting. Without translating in my head. Without planning my reply. And something shifted. Not dramatically. Gently. The room felt less tense. My body relaxed. That's not emotional imagination, that's nervous system regulation. When safety increases, language flows better. Here's the irony. Listening improved my English more than speaking that week. Listening with full attention strengthens comprehension networks faster than passive exposure. And emotionally, it rebuilt connection faster than any apology could. That I also listened to myself differently. When I felt tired, I stopped labeling it as failure. Fatigue isn't laziness. It's information. My brain was asking for safety, not pressure. Marriage, like language learning, isn't about fluency. It's about responsiveness. You don't need perfect sentences. You need timely attention. Miss that, and even perfect grammar won't help. There were still awkward pauses. Still misunderstandings. But now, pauses didn't feel like threats. They felt like thinking time. Like buffering. That reframe matters. In psychology, reinterpreting pauses reduces anxiety and increases tolerance for ambiguity. Key skills in both relationships and language learning. That I noticed my motivation returning quietly. Not with excitement. With willingness. 5 minutes of practice felt possible again. A short conversation felt safe. Progress doesn't announce itself. It sneaks back in when pressure leaves. Listening taught me this. Connection isn't built by saying the right thing. It's built by making space for the right moment, and that lesson led to a bigger realization, one that changed how I see marriage entirely. Marriage is not fluent. We talk about fluent English like it's a destination. One day you arrive, unpack your bags, and never struggle again. Marriage is often sold the same way. Find the right person, and things should flow. But that idea collapses the moment real life shows up, with stress, fatigue, cultural differences, and unspoken expectations. That week taught me something uncomfortable. Marriage is not fluent. It's practiced at IN linguistics. Fluency isn't perfection. It's the ability to keep going despite mistakes. You hesitate. You self-correct. You misunderstand and ask again. That's not failure, that's communication. Marriage works exactly the same way. For a long time, I thought struggling meant something was wrong. With my English. With my relationship. But psychologists say this mindset, the fixed belief, is one of the fastest ways to quit. When you believe ability should be stable, effort feels like evidence of weakness. In reality, effort is evidence of care. That week, we stopped aiming for smooth conversations. We aimed for honest ones. Sometimes that meant speaking slowly. Sometimes repeating the same sentence 3 different ways. Sometimes saying, I don't know how to explain this yet. In English, that sentence is gold. In marriage, it's even more valuable. Interestingly, language research shows that learners who tolerate ambiguity improve faster long-term. They don't panic when things feel unclear. They stay engaged. That tolerance is also what keeps marriages alive during difficult seasons. I stopped expecting emotional fluency. I started expecting learning curves. There's also a biological angle. Long-term relationships naturally go through stress cycles. During those periods, the brain's threat system activates more easily. Communication feels harder. Not because love is gone, but because safety needs repair. That repair doesn't come from smooth talk. It comes from consistency, small actions. Showing up. Staying curious. I practiced English the same way. Short sessions. No pressure. Real-life sentences. Not to impress. Just to express. That shift changed everything. Motivation returned when the goal stopped being, sound good, and became, stay connected. Marriage isn't fluent. It's responsive. It adjusts. It pauses. It restarts mid-sentence. And when you accept that, struggle stops feeling like a warning sign. It becomes part of the process. By the end of that realization, something surprising happened. Not a breakthrough. A calm point. 2 weeks had passed. And I could finally see what had changed. 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later. Nothing looked dramatically different. Same apartment. Same routines. Same imperfect English. But inside, the tension had softened. Not disappeared, softened. And that matters more than people think. progress rarely feels like fireworks. More often, it feels like less resistance that I noticed it in small moments. I didn't freeze when conversations slowed down. I didn't rush to fill silence. I let sentences come out imperfectly. Sometimes I paused mid-thought and started again. And no one panicked. That alone rewired something in my brain. Neuroscience calls this corrective experience. When your brain expects danger but receives safety instead, it updates its prediction. Slowly. Quietly. That's how fear loosens its grip. Not through logic. Through experience. That I end my marriage, we weren't suddenly happier. We were more real. We checked in more often. Short questions. Honest answers. No speeches. No fixing. Just presence. Relationship studies show that frequent low-intensity connection is more protective than rare deep talks. Love survives on consistency, not drama. My English followed the same pattern. I practiced in short, calm sessions. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Listening without pressure. Speaking without judging myself. Motivation didn't come back as excitement. It came back as tolerance. I could tolerate being bad at it again. That's a skill most people never train. 2 weeks ago, I thought something was breaking. Now I see something was adjusting. Stress had exposed weak points, not to destroy them, but to show where care was needed. That I stopped asking, why is this so hard? I started asking, what does this need? That question changed everything. English didn't need discipline. It needed emotional safety. Marriage didn't need fixing. It needed attention. When those needs were met, effort stopped feeling heavy. 2 weeks later, I wasn't fluent. In language. In love. In life. But I was engaged again. And engagement is where growth actually happens. There was only one thing left to say. The reason I'm telling you this at all. Why I'm telling you this. I didn't tell you this story to sound strong. I told it because, 2 weeks ago, I wasn't. And that matters more. If you're watching this channel for English, here's the quiet truth no algorithm likes to say out loud. Most people don't quit learning because grammar is hard. They quit because life gets heavy. Love gets complicated. Marriage gets quiet. And when emotions pile up, English becomes the easiest thing to abandon. What happened to me in these 2 weeks in the US wasn't a miracle. My marriage isn't suddenly perfect. My English didn't jump to native level. But something more important happened. I stopped carrying everything alone. Psychology has a term called social buffering. When you lean on others, friends, partners, even a voice in a video, your stress response softens. When stress softens, learning becomes possible again. Not faster. Just possible. That's why I'm telling you this. Because maybe you're not lazy. Maybe you're just tired. Maybe your English isn't bad, your heart just needs support. Maybe what you need isn't another how to study video, but permission to go slow without quitting. This channel exists for that version of you. The one who practices English the same way real life works, imperfectly, emotionally, humanly. Through stories. Through pauses. Through days when all you can do is listen and breathe. That if you're in a relationship that feels quiet, if you're living abroad and feel lonely in a language you understand, if you're learning English and secretly wondering whether it's still worth it, then stay, not because I have all the answers, but because sometimes, continuing together is easier than continuing alone. English doesn't need you to be brave every day. Marriage doesn't need perfect words. Life doesn't need fluency. That it needs honesty. It needs slowness. It needs connection, and if this story made you feel a little less alone, then it's already doing its job.